Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar tonight on the wonders of Uzbekistan. My name's Jonny Bealby. I founded Wild Frontiers, and tonight we're going to entertain you, I'm sure, with some great stories of this wonderful destination. First of all, let me just say how excited we are again, and I'm sorry if I'm sounding like a cracked record for those of you that come on these webinars quite often. Because it's just fabulous that we have so many people joining us tonight for this broadcast. Last month we had Benedict Allen talking about Mongolia, and that was fantastic. Got nearly 700 people tonight. We're up to 600 and still counting. So it's brilliant. And I think, from our point of view, this is one of perhaps the silver linings of this COVID nightmare, is that we've found a new way to communicate with people all over the world so that we can show our enthusiasm for travel and hopefully entertain and educate you a little bit about some of these wonderful destinations that we love to travel to. So welcome to all of you, wherever you're tuning in from. Great to have you here. So for those of you that haven't been to one of our webinars before, let me just quickly explain how it will go. I'm going to give you a little bit of housekeeping, then I'm going to explain a bit about Wild Frontiers, how I started the travel business, and then on a very high level, talk a bit about Uzbekistan, the culture, the history, the geography, that sort of thing, just to kind of set the scene so you know where you are and what we're talking about. Then I will hand over to our special guest tonight, which is Caroline Eden, which is fantastic. And Caroline is not going to be doing something boring like I'm doing, which is doing a PowerPoint presentation. Caroline's going to do something a bit different with a show and tell. So that should be entertaining. And then I'll hand over to Marc Leaderman, our Director of Product and Operations. Again, those of you that have watched our webinars before will know Marc very well. He will talk you through everything that the traveler can do in Uzbekistan, and particularly, of course, what you can do on Wild Frontier trips. So we will throw in a couple of polls throughout the evening so that you can be a bit more interactive and answer some questions. We'll do a Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions for us, any of us three, please just use the Q&A button bottom right. And we are, of course, recording the session, which you will get a link to in an email tomorrow. So you could watch it again, or you can share it with friends. And we'll also put in that email a bunch of other information that we think you will find interesting. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to hopefully do this in about an hour, but knowing how much I waffle on, it might take a little bit longer. I am going to share my screen, and we are then going to talk about, well, me to start off with. So yes, I'm Jonny Bealby. I founded Wild Frontiers, as I say, 20 odd years ago. And I did it after a decade of big adventures. I drove a motorbike right the way around Africa. I walked through parts of India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And I rode a horse along the Silk Road from Kashgar to the Caspian Sea, which of course has certain relevance to tonight's talk. That culminated in 3 books. Running with the Moon, about the motorcycle journey, For a Pagan Song, about the journey through Afghanistan in the footsteps of the man who would be king, Rudyard Kipling's famous short story, and Silk Dreams, Troubled Road, about the journey on horseback through Central Asia. And it was really on that journey that I decided to give up being a travel writer, to be honest, and start doing Wild Frontiers more seriously. I'd actually kind of had the idea for starting Wild Frontiers on the second book when I was in Pakistan with a pagan tribe called the Kalash. But I was doing it kind of part-time while travel writing. And then on this journey, I kind of realized that actually travel writing was somewhat tricky, and that what I really loved was taking people to the places that I'd found. So having finished this trip, which saw me go through Uzbekistan and in fact have some rather strange experiences in Uzbekistan, I set up Wild Frontiers properly. Actually, I should also add that I made a Discovery Channel film about this journey, yeah, I'll make sure Mike puts that in a link to that so if you're interested, you can watch my adventures along the Silk Road tomorrow. Now, Wild Frontiers, 20 years on, we run small groups and tailor-made holidays to about 90 destinations. The Indian subcontinent is probably our biggest location, but also, of course, still massively into Central Asia, parts of Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. So that's kind of a brief little history on how we get started. Let's now talk Uzbekistan. So the first thing I love to say about Uzbekistan is that it's only one of two countries in the world that is double landlocked. That's to say it's landlocked by landlocked countries. The other is Liechtenstein. Its total surface area of about 500,000 square kilometers, which is about twice what the UK is. And it has a population of 34 million, which is about half what the UK is. Its capital city is Tashkent, which I've always really quite liked. It's quite a modern city on the whole. It was the fourth biggest city in the Soviet Union, but it's great. It's got parks and monuments and tree-lined streets. It's a nice place. And it's home to about 2.3 million people. Only about 10% of the country is fit for agriculture, and that's in no small part due to the ecological disaster that was the Soviet Union's monoculture policy, where Uzbekistan was the state in the Union that supplied cotton for the rest of the Union, and that requires a huge amount of water irrigation. And so a lot of the water from the Amudarya was fed into the cotton fields of Uzbekistan, and that's basically left the Aral Sea pretty much without a source of water, and it's therefore shrunk pretty radically. The picture you can see bottom right, of that picture, the one on the left was the Aral Sea, a satellite picture taken of the Aral Sea in 1960 when it was 70,000 square kilometers in size. The picture on the right was taken in 2009 when it was only 7,000 square kilometers in size. It's pretty much all gone now. Of course, the ethnic makeup of Uzbekistan is predominantly made up of Uzbeks, as you would imagine, who speak Uzbek and are a predominantly Muslim race. The Uzbeks make up one of the 5 Turkic groups of Central Asia. So you have the Uzbeks, the Kyrgyz, the Kazakhs, the Uyghurs over in Xinjiang province, and the Turkmens. You also have the Tajiks, but the Tajiks are a Persian group of people. And they were the original Sogdians, or the original kind of traders of the Silk Road, who, along with the Uzbeks, who are a sedentary people, were, as I say, the main kind of middlemen of the Silk Road. The Kazakhs, the Kyrgyz, and the Turkmen were the nomads. They took the caravans, and the Uyghurs, the Tajiks, and the Uzbeks bought and sold the goods, loosely speaking. But of course, what most people travel to Uzbekistan today to see are the famous monuments. This is the Registan Square in Samarkand, as it would have looked, I'm guessing, somewhere in the mid-19th century. This is what it looks like today in the 21st century. And these sites are truly amongst some of the great architectural sites anywhere in the world, in my opinion. But it's not just about amazing architecture. There is also some fabulous scenery, particularly up in the Narata Mountains, which are just to the north of Samarkand and to the kind of southwest of Tashkent. Of course, it's the Silk Road that is the great story of this region, I suppose. It started about 128 BC and ran pretty much until the beginning of the 20th century. Obviously, the route went from Xi'an in China all the way across the mountains and deserts of Central Asia to Istanbul and even on to Venice. And Uzbekistan really sat at the heart of that, right in the middle, the kind of the crossroads of it. And as a result, towns like Samarkand, Bukhara, Kokand, Khiva, all became very wealthy off the back of this trade. Indeed, Bukhara became so wealthy, it had 365 mosques, one for every day of the year. The most famous people of Uzbekistan are certainly Amir Timur. He is the great national hero, the person that everyone looks to for their kind of identity, I suppose you could say. In the 13th century, obviously Genghis Khan had gone through the area, but at about 150 years later, it was Timur that took over his empire, and during his 35-year reign, pretty much took over the entire part of Genghis's Western empire. He also stretched it down to Delhi, which he sacked in 1398, and he died on a campaign into China in 1404. So he was the kind of, I say, as the Uzbeks are concerned, their great kind of national hero. As far as most historians are concerned, he was really renowned for his brutality. In fact, some scholars suggest that during his time, his 35 years in charge, some 17 million people died as a direct consequence of his rule, which was about 5% of the population of the world. Now, if you think that Hitler, Stalin, and Mao Zedong only dispatched or were responsible for the deaths of allegedly 45 million, 60 million, and 80 million, which is approximately 6% of the world, you can kind of understand that that's not a great legacy to hold, I'm sure. But on the flip side of that, he was also a great patron of the arts. And of course, in Samarkand, having brought many of the artisans from his conquered domains back, he created one of the great cities of the world. His great-great-great-grandson was Babur, who was born in Andijan in the Fergana Valley, and having conquered and lost Samarkand and Fergana on 3 occasions, in 1526 traveled to India and at the famous Battle of Panipat beat the Lodi dynasty and so set up the Mughal dynasty of India, which of course ruled until the British at the end of the 18th century. So those are the 2 big kind of historic figures of the country. One more story to talk about, because it's one of my passions, is the Great Game. This is the war of attrition played out between Tsarist Russia and Imperial Britain during the 19th century. The Brits were very paranoid that the Russians were going to steal away across the high passes of Central Asia and invade India, the jewel in the crown. And so they advanced westwards while the Russians advanced eastwards. It's interesting to note that at the beginning of the 19th century, Russia, Imperial Russia and Tsarist Russia and Imperial Britain were over 2,500 miles apart. By the end of it, they were just 27 miles apart at the Wakhan corridor of Afghanistan, which you could travel to on a Wild Frontiers trip, by the way. But it was an extraordinary time where young officers were told to dress up in local clothes, dress up as horse traders or holy men, and go off up into these mountain passes. They would dye their skin with walnut juice and caustic soda, learn the local languages, and try and kind of get through these areas to map the passes and work out just how easy that would have been for the Russians. They also were sent there to set up dialogue and treaties with local rulers. One such ruler in Bukhara was Nasrullah Khan, and he was a notorious fellow. One of the things that he's always accused of was one of his favorite methods of dispatching his enemies was to take them to the top of the famous Kolan minaret, stitch them into a Hessian sack, and then chuck them off the edge. However, Connolly and Stoddard, this is Colonel Charles Stoddard on the right of that picture, went there in 1838 to try and get him to be on the British side. He was kind of put under house arrest for a while. Unfortunately for him, what was going on in Afghanistan was the first Afghan war, called a war. It was a total disaster. The Brits were completely wiped out. So when his friend Connolly turned up to try and get him out, he was chucked in a pit. They were both put in a pit. The Amir was evidently not impressed by the British, and eventually he pulled them out of the pit, and in front of the Ark, which is where tourists go today, they were dispatched by having their heads chopped off. So it was a dangerous game, the Great Game, and if you want to know more about that, I strongly recommend you read Peter Hopkirk's brilliant book called The Great Game. At the end of that period, the Tsarist Russia had control over the whole region. When the Russian Revolution happened in 1917, there was a big fight out here between the White Russians and the Red Russians, which of course the Reds, the Bolsheviks, eventually won, and they took control of this whole region in 1925. Just to kind of finish that off, I'm just going to go back to the original picture of Uzbekistan, because this is quite interesting. When Stalin took control of this region, he was very paranoid about a pan-Islamic pact forming against him on his Eastern Empire or Eastern borders. And so he did what any leader of that time did, which was divide and rule. And here you can see the bizarre boundaries between Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan. Indeed, there are even islands, as you can see there, of Uzbekistan within Kyrgyzstan and islands of Kyrgyzstan within Uzbekistan. The town of Osh is in Kyrgyzstan, but it is 80% Uzbek. So it was a real mishmash to try and break up this ability of a pan-Islamic movement rising on his eastern borders. So at the end of the 20th century, of course, the Soviet Union fell, and Uzbekistan in 1991 became independent. So that's where I'm going to leave it. And I am going to, oh, one more thing, sorry, yes, everyone always asks in the questions, what's the situation with COVID? So I thought I would tell you that right now. So to hold off on some of those questions. So far, they've maybe obviously handled COVID reasonably well. They've had 80,000 cases and so far 622 deaths. Their 7-day rolling average is reported as 110 cases per day. The country has authorized the Russian Sputnik vaccine and the AstraZeneca one, and they started rolling that out this month. And they are now fully open to tourists, both Brits, Americans, all types, as long as you've had a PCR test or you can prove you've had a vaccine. We have trips from June onwards, and of course, Marc will be talking about those shortly. And finally, I'm just throwing this on there. We're going to have a page on our website just to help you all out, because we realize it's quite complicated trying to work out where you can travel to. So we're going to have a page on the website, which will be very easy to be able to see which countries are allowing you in. Now, this is not about the British allowing you out, because those of you in Britain will know that we have a government that is not really allowing us to travel, but not everybody has such draconian measures. And so, for example, if you're in America, you can travel, and you can travel to Uzbekistan pretty much straight away. So we're going to have that page on the website, so keep an eye out for that, and that will tell you all the latest news as far as that's concerned. So without further ado, let me introduce our special guest. So Caroline Eden is a writer with a focus on Central Asia, contributing to the travel, food and arts pages of The Guardian, The Daily Telegraph, The Financial Times and The Times Literary Supplement. She has published 3 books on the region: Samarkand, The Land of the Anchorbird, and most recently Red Sands, which was Book of the Year 2020 for The Financial Times, The New Yorker and The Sunday Times. Last month, it won the prestigious André Simon Food Award 2020. Peter Frankopan, author of the brilliant Silk Roads, said of the book, "Red Sands captures the sights and tastes and feel of Central Asia so well that when reading the book, I sometimes was convinced I was there in person. A wonderful book from start to finish." That is praise indeed. So Caroline, if you're there and can turn on your video and unmute yourself, I will hand over to you.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me.
You
can't start your video because the host has stopped it.
Oh, Mike, can you do something about that? Mike needs to make you a co-host, I think.
Okay.
Hang on a second.
You are a co-host now, so I'm going to try now.
Yeah, there you go. Whoa, we have you. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn my video off, and over to you, Caroline.
Right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for that introduction, Johnny. So I'm Caroline Eden. I'm a writer based in Edinburgh, quite based in Edinburgh at the moment. Most years I'd spend a few weeks or perhaps even a few months in Central Asia, a region I've been visiting since 2009. In 2014, I brought out my book Samarkand, as Jonny mentioned, which was really an introductory cookbook on the food of Central Asia, and mentioned the other books as well. So thanks very much to Jonny and the team at Wild Frontiers. They're a group of people I've been friends with for many years, and I'm a big fan of what they do. So it's a real pleasure for me to be with you all this evening, wherever you are in the world. I hope you have a glass of wine or a cup of tea, or perhaps a dram of whiskey even. I'm going to go on for about 20 minutes and do my best to take you virtually to Uzbekistan while we can't travel, most of us. So this is a food-focused chat. And I'll start by saying, perhaps unlike somewhere like Spain or India, most of us wouldn't travel to Central Asia purely for the cuisine if we're coming from the outside. But if we look at the food, it really opens up compelling aspects of countries like Uzbekistan that perhaps have been passed over in some of the more sort of macho style travel writing that's been published over the years. Uzbekistan, if you've been, or even if you've seen photos, you'll understand the markets are full of fantastic produce, wonderful vegetables, wonderful dairy, entire lanes of bread, dried nuts and fruits coming from the Caucasus, coming from the 5 different countries. And I do believe that you will get a lot more out of the food if you understand a little bit, if you have a little bit of knowledge before you travel. And I think for us travelers, food is such an important part of the travel day. It's quite tiring sometimes on long journeys. And that break 3 times a day to sit at the dastarkan, the tablecloth that's set low to the ground in Central Asia, to share a meal, to rest and digest and think about what you've seen and what's coming up. I think that's really important part of the travel experience anywhere in the world. But I really, really love sitting down for a meal in Central Asia. So first of all, I thought we'd start in Tashkent, obviously the capital of Uzbekistan, and if you're traveling there, possibly where you'll also start your travels. Tashkent is set in a fertile valley. It's an abundant region, and it's had a reputation for being a city of bread. Why? Because bread is always on the table in Central Asia. It's there for 3 meals. At breakfast, you might have it with quince jam or mulberry jam. And then at lunch, you might have it with plov. And then in the evening, you might have it with shashlik. So it's always there. The word non bread, non comes from the Persian naan. And it's round like a dinner plate, often the size of a dinner plate, though they come in different sizes. It has a crusty bottom and a kind of squidgy, almost bagel-like top, quite elastic. And the centre is stamped so as not to rise. That's the sort of crispy middle part. And it's often scattered with white or black sesame seeds and glazed with oil. It's quite calorific. I do tend to put on significant amounts of weight if I'm there in Central Asia for any amount of time. I did bake one in my very cold basement kitchen here in Edinburgh earlier to show you. It's a mini one. You can see. So the centre is depressed like this bit caught because it's very thin, and the outside is sort of a raised rim. The stamp that the Uzbeks use is a Czechish. It looks like this. This is a small one. You stamp the middle, and that stops the centre from rising. So it's central to Uzbek culture, as I was saying, in all aspects of life, actually. So if a man is going away to the army, if he's a soldier, a family will keep a loaf of bread on the day that he leaves and maybe send him away with one, and they'll keep it until he safely returns. The anxious maybe will put some breadcrumbs under their pillows at night in the hope that birds will come down in the night and fly away with the demons and the things that are bothering them, and they will wake up with a fresh and relieved mind. Tandoor ovens are what these wonderful breads are baked in, clay tandoor ovens. They are slapped onto the searing hot sides. It's a time-honored tradition. The Soviets tried to mechanize, economize the bread making in Central Asia, in Uzbekistan, and the Uzbeks quite rightly returned to the tandoor. They did not want the state-made bread. So what does all this have to do with Tashkent? Well, let's talk about Anna Akhmatova, one of Russia's greatest poets, to tell us why Tashkent is known throughout the former Soviet Union still as the city of bread. Anna arrived to Tashkent in October 1941, fleeing Leningrad. She stayed in Tashkent for 3 years. This wasn't a short period of time. She moved in to various different houses actually throughout the city. And this was a time, obviously, of great hardship for the entire Soviet Union. And what she found there was a city of sunbeams, of almond trees, of blossom, of apricot trees, and the fabled fruit soon started to fall into her poetry. So we hear of the moon described as a slice of melon, and the pomegranate tree described as a royal dwarf. And she writes about the bread. The bread starts to fall into her lyrics and her poetry as well. She can't help being influenced by what's around her. Comparatively at this time, Uzbekistan was the land of plenty. It was far south, away from Moscow and Leningrad and Russian cities where there were big problems happening. And this term, Tashkent, city of bread, started to be bandied around and is one that we still hear today. The saying, Tashkent, city of bread, came from the father of Uzbek cinema, Shuhrat Apazov, who in the 1960s brought out a film called Tashkent, City of Bread. And that was based on a book which came out a few decades previously about a young boy fleeing famine in the Volga region and picking up grain for his starving family in Tashkent. So this really cemented the city's reputation as a place away from war and famine, and as Tashkent as a place of abundance. Today in Tashkent, if you go to one of the bigger markets like Chorsu, you don't just find a few stalls. There is an entire section dedicated to bread making, and it's wonderful. You can go and watch the bread being baked. You can talk to the bakers if you speak some Russian or Uzbek. And there are ladies wheeling around prams that you'd normally find children in with their loaves of bread wrapped and swaddled in towels and blankets to keep the loaves warm. It's really super atmospheric, very photogenic. And even in the smaller markets, I really like Chagatai Bazaar in Old Tashkent. And there you find Old Tashkent naan bread, which I have a recipe for in my new book, which is studded with walnuts and raisins. And from there, you might cross the road and go into the Chagatai cemetery, where somewhat eccentrically, some of the graves are planted with basil, which was a revelation to me. Purple and green basil, these scented graves, quite remarkable. So nowadays, you can buy a czechish like this from Etsy, the online sort of craft supermarket, before you had to bring them back. So that's bread, that's Tashkent, city of bread. I wanted to tell you about that. And then I thought we might talk briefly about food in art, which is a really interesting subject as far as Uzbekistan is concerned, and the Savitsky Museum. The Savitsky Museum in the west, in the northwest of Uzbekistan, isn't just one of my favorite places in Uzbekistan, it's one of my favorite places in the world. I've made several trips there, and Wild Frontiers, I know, take their travelers there as well. It's between the Kizilkum and the Karakum, the red sands and the black sands desert. Jonny earlier on was explaining about the Aral Sea, and this was an area that was particularly ravaged by this. It's very, very remote, even by Central Asian standards. And it has this fantastic museum. It attracts tourists, it attracts art curators and journalists. And anyone really who travels to Uzbekistan will be a fool to miss it if they've got any passing interest in art. So many artists traveled from Russian cities into Uzbekistan in the 1920s and 30s, and they arrived with inspiration from artists like Chagall and Kandinsky, and they mixed what they found locally with those inspirations. So you would have the sort of avant-garde styles, and then you would have it sort of mixed with the desert lights and the bazaars and the things that they found when they got their new inspiration. And during a recent visit in 2019, I started to notice this recurring motif in the Savitsky, and it was food. Once you see it, you can't help but see it. It's everywhere in the museum. Couples dining, collective farms, still lifes of melon, of pelmeni, or shashlik, of bottles or samovars, and many, many, many paintings of chaikhanas, the tea houses. One of my favorites, which I'm going to show you in a magazine, is by Alexei Isupov. I just think this is a stunning painting. You've got the tea boy in his very elegant clothes and the rose emblem teapots and the lovely, beautiful trays. And I think that really invites you in as a viewer of that painting. And then another one I wanted to show you as well, actually, which is by Mikhail Kurzin, who we'll talk a bit more about in a moment. He has a fantastic painting, which isn't always on display, but it's this one of this man chopping carrots, and it's simply called Carrot Chopper. And you can imagine those carrots going into plov, the national rice dish, which will always have carrots in it. So I love that. The best painting, in my opinion, if you're looking for food in the Savitsky, is another one by Kurzin. It's this one, and it's called Meat Dumplings. And it is bookmarked by two others of his paintings, one of Shashlik, I think, and one of Pilaf. And the meat dumplings are in the center. And these are huge paintings. There's just 3 on an entire wall. And I think that particular painting is a really good talking point about these forbidden artists, as they're called. So Kurzin was considered bourgeois, and he was banned by the Soviet officials. He was horrendously treated by the regime, and he was sent to work on the Road of Bones with a pickaxe. His hands were broken by the end of it, and he died in 1957. Until perestroika in the 1980s, the only art that was allowed, as you probably know, was the socialist realism form. So that was happy workers, victorious youth. That was what was permitted. Kurzin's paintings on display in the museum are quite risque in many respects, and this is the sort of safer work. And Igor Savitsky, the man who founded the museum, worked tirelessly to try and save these works that the Soviets were confiscating and banning and burning, and people were hiding. And he made something like 20 trips from Nukus, the town in Karakorum, Pakistan, to Moscow to beg people to take back these artworks. And he squirreled them away in this very secretive province of the Soviet Union, as it was then. This was where the Red Army had a chemical research unit where the Novichok nerve agent was developed. So that kind of gives you an idea. But it was also a very safe hiding place for these works of art. So why did Kurzin paint this meat dumplings painting? I asked Marinika Babanazarova, the former curator of the Savitsky, when I was in Tashkent recently, what she thought about it. And she said, when he was released from the camps, he was suffering from malnutrition because political prisoners were not allowed to work. He had no job and he was ill. He was almost dying, but he created fantastic feasts in his mind, in his work, in the still light of shish kebabs, pilaf, and pelmeni. What we don't know is if the art was his true spirit or if food was simply a safe subject so that he could be free and not pursued. I think we probably know it was the latter for Mikhail Kurzin. On a lighter, brighter note, I'd next like to take you to the Fergana Valley, another absolutely favourite place of mine in Central Asia, shared by 3 countries, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. It's very lush. It's full of great orchards. It's suffered terrible ethnic violence in cities like Osh that Jonny was talking about earlier in recent history, but it's a wonderfully welcoming place today. It's a fantastic place to visit. It's beautiful in the autumn when the harvest foods are all available, but it's also wonderful in the spring where you have tiny, very sweet strawberries and cherries. Yeah, so Fergana Valley is it's a bit like Kent in England. It's the sort of garden, it's the basket, it's where the most fantastic fruits can be found. You will probably go to Kokand, the city, often the gateway for many people into the Fergana Valley. One of the 3 great Uzbek Khanates, the other being Khiva and Bukhara. And it's popular with visitors mainly for its city palace, which was built in 1873, has 100 rooms, has pomegranates growing in the courtyard, incredibly beautiful. But that isn't why I went to Kokand on a recent visit. I went because I'd heard about Kokand halva. Uzbek halva, and halvas are different in different places in the world. Uzbek halva from Kokand is what we English people would describe as fudge-like. It's squidgy. It's beautifully sort of marbled paper looking, and it is often filled with things like pistachios, persimmons, and shaved almonds. And you can buy it in Kokand. The Uzbeks all know Kokand is a good place to buy halva. I've got a picture to show you. This is my new book, and inside there's a double-page spread of halva being made by Abdul Wahid, and he is a master confectionery maker in Kokand, and I have a recipe in there about how you can make it at home. I also wanted to talk to you about how these wonderful fruits and nuts, which Uzbekistan is rightly famous for, features in the wonderful ikat fabrics, which if you're like me and you like fabrics, Uzbekistan is just a dream. Interior designers in the fanciest shops have known about this for a long time, but it's really catching on. People love ikat, and you can see in some of these designs quite abstract, quite kind of hidden motifs, emblems, colors from nature in the ikat. Pomegranates often feature, they're a sign of fertility and fullness. They will often feature on fabrics given as part of a dowry to a newly married couple. The same for carnations, actually. Sometimes scorpions are stitched around the ankles of trousers in the more sort of nomadic groups of people to protect them from harm. And fruit was also used to make colours traditionally in dyes. As I'm sure you know, pomegranate in Uzbekistan was mixed with iron fillings to create a black dye, while pistachios were used as a tannin. Egg white was sometimes used to gloss and glaze cloth. And there are codes in the colours as well of the ikat. Red is considered life-giving, yellow often is a sign of marriage. The best place to shop for ikat, or one of the best places to shop for ikat, is Margilan, which is an hour and a half from Kokand. I have been there with Wild Frontiers many years ago, and it is wonderful. I highly recommend it. During the Soviet era, traditional weavers were banned. They were collectivized into cooperatives, and Moscow again attempted to mechanize, economize weaving, and synthetic dyes gradually replaced natural dyes. Secret hidden workshops started up where people could keep hold of their traditions, but if they were caught, they were arrested or worse. Today, there's a wonderful revival, there has been for some time now, really, a wonderful revival of ikat weaving, and it's part of the wider Islamic Renaissance in Central Asia. Mosques have been rebuilt, are being developed. Some, are maybe more aggressively developed than others, but yes, hundreds of mosques were destroyed during the Soviet period, and it's wonderful to see them reopening again. Lastly, I thought we'd go to the Kizilkum Desert. Just to say that delicious food can sometimes be found in the most unexpected of places. The first time that I traveled through the Kizilkum Desert was on a drive between Khiva and Bukhara, and many of you will have done that trip. But if you go up to Narata, north of Samarkand, on the edge of the desert, that's really interesting, especially in the springtime, because the desert becomes a garden. Suddenly you have miles and miles and miles of springtime poppies. It is the most incredible sight, one of the most incredible sights I've ever seen. And you have sage growing, and a couple of years ago, I met a beekeeper called Olim in this desert, and it wasn't like a little, small operation he was running in the middle of the Kizilkum Desert. He was producing 3 tons of honey a year there, and he had milk churns, and they were all full of honey. And he explained to me that he lives like a nomad. He travels with his bees, who are mainly using the cotton flowers, and he follows his flower-fed bees to wherever they go. So he sort of lives as a botanist and a beekeeper, understanding the plants between March and September, and then in the winter does his sales and looks after his hives and repairs. He gave me a little bit of this cotton honey to taste. I'd never tried it before, and it was the color of cloudy wheat, and it had sort of peachy tones to it. It was wonderful. And he told me that he's exporting it to Turkey, Korea, China, and Dubai from there in the Kizilkum Desert. It may sound remote, but you see, it isn't. It's full of life. The little guest house in Narata I was staying at, there's an enormous mulberry tree, and we would have white mulberries for breakfast every morning, picked. Arms would go up during the breakfast and they'd come down. When I think about these images and stories at the moment, I have to say they give me some solace. Like all of you, I'm sure, it's so hard to travel now, and I miss going to these places and meeting people and talking to people. And when we travel, we carry these things back with us, I think. And memories are not all we're left with. We return changed, connected to different places, connected to different people. And that's the wonder of travel. I hope it's not too cheesy, but I wanted to leave you on a nice quote I read the other day by Proust, which I really think sums this up. the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And I thought that was so beautiful. And I think we have to hold on to that.
Wonderful, Caroline. Thank you very much indeed. You know, I just wanted to reach out and grab that bread and tear a bit off and eat it, as you do in the bazaars and stuff of Uzbekistan. So delicious and so varied. I mean, they're works of art. You don't actually want to eat them. They're so beautiful. That was fantastic, Caroline. Thank you very much for taking us through your stories of Uzbekistan.
Thanks, Johnny.
Okay, so we are cracking on because time, as ever, is against us. Can I introduce Marc Leaderman, our Director of Product and Operations, who's going to talk us through now. No, I tell you what I'm going to do. Sorry, I've forgotten about the poll, haven't I? So let's quickly do a poll. And let's do the first one. Okay, here we go. So you've got to now, I'm launching it there. So can you please click on one of these? Have you already been to Uzbekistan? I'm booked to go. I would like to go one day. I can't see myself ever visiting Uzbekistan. I'll give you 30 seconds to fill that in, which is great. A lot of you have already been. That's fantastic. I'm booked to go. I hope that's with Wild Frontiers. Let's have a look. So I think we're about done. I am gonna end it. Okay, and let's share the results. There we go. So 31% have already been. That's really good. That's a lot of you. Fantastic. I'm booked to go 7%, and I would like to go one day 62%. Only 1% don't see yourself going. Well, that's fine. So wonderful. So let's just close that down. And then Marc, can I hand over to you to talk about Uzbekistan from a kind of Wild Frontiers perspective?
No problem at all. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Caroline. Fantastic. Really, really, really interesting stuff. And wherever you are, good evening, good afternoon, good morning. When I first joined Wild Frontiers, it was 2007, and I was very, very fortunate. I'd traveled quite extensively throughout the world. I'd been to Latin America, I'd been to Sub-Saharan Africa, I'd been to the Middle East, I'd been to the Indian subcontinent, I'd been to Southeast Asia, but I'd never been to Central Asia. And I think for a lot of travelers, it kind of just sits there as a little bit of a gap in your travel history, a little bit of an unknown entity. But because Johnny had been there, he'd written his book, and because it was so central to Wild Frontiers, it was one of the very, very first destinations that Johnny sent me to when I first joined the company. So when I went there, and let me just share my screen, I discovered the 5 stands of Central Asia, you know, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. And if you haven't been, each one of them has their own unique charm, unique offering, and I would strongly suggest at some stage trying to visit them all. However, if you can only visit one, and especially if your interest is more from the cultural and from the Silk Road archaeological side of things, then Uzbekistan really is the jewel of the crown and the one that you are going to be drawn to more than anyone else. And if you see Uzbekistan, it's very much a country which you can visit as a standalone destination, and many, many people do. But if you have a look at it, you'll see that it is actually got land borders with every other stan. And so it does actually work very, very well to be visited in conjunction with some of the other stans. And I'll talk a little bit at the end about how you can possibly do that. But assuming you're going to just visit Uzbekistan or start and finish there, it's worth knowing that these are your main ways of getting to and from Uzbekistan. Now, while many of you will have heard of Turkish Aeroflot, not many of you may have heard of Uzbekistan Airways. It may not be up there with Emirates and Etihad and Cathay as being amongst the world's best, but it is interesting to know that it flies direct, amongst other places, to London and to New York, and it does actually have a very reliable reputation. Those of you that have already been to Uzbekistan, depending on when you traveled, may remember the dreaded visa application process. It used to be horrendously red tape and involved and needed letters of invitation. And if you're entering at the border, requiring this to be filled out time and time again. These days, it is much, much easier. If you're British, as well as number of other nationalities, there's no visa, it's visa free. And if you're American, there's a very simple e-visa which you can apply for. So it has become a much easier process to come and visit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through our standalone Uzbekistan group tour called Land of Silk Road Treasures. But please bear in mind when I'm talking that although this group tour has scheduled departures throughout the year, if you like the itinerary, you can take it as a private group and find alternative dates and take your family, take your friends and go and do the itinerary. Or you can mix and match, take bits which you like, bits which you don't like, and do a complete tailor-made in Uzbekistan as well. And that's what 50% of our clients do. So you've heard Caroline and Jonny talk about some of the famous places. You'll see Tashkent, you'll see Samarkand, you'll see Bukhara and Khiva as the main places. But we also do visit Nukus and the Narata Mountains on this trip. And what I'm going to do is just to talk you through it to give you a bit of a feel of what you would see if you went to Uzbekistan today. You start in Tashkent. As Jonny said, it is a big city, 2.5 million. You will see bread. You'll see lots of great things there. And it is, I would say, a fun place, but it doesn't really have those absolute must-see sites that you might associate with other parts of Uzbekistan. We usually spend a little bit of time in the old part of town and a little bit of time in the new part of town. There was actually a huge earthquake in 1966, which destroyed a lot of the city, and it was rebuilt in Soviet style. But in the old town, you will find this in the Hast Imam Square. This is actually a mosque. Ironically, although it's right in the heart of the old town, this was built in 2007, but it was built, as you can see, in an old style, but to an incredibly high level. You've got sandalwood from India, you've got green marble from Turkey, and you've got blue tile work coming from Iran. But also on this square, complete contrast, you will find the Uthman Quran. Now, this is supposedly one of the oldest Qurans in the entire world, dating back to the 7th century. Tamerlane, the destroyer that Jonny spoke about, he actually brought this Quran to Uzbekistan. The Russians then took it away and then finally gave it back in the 1920s under Lenin. So that can be visited there. And then in the new part of town, you've actually got some quite outstanding Soviet architecture, including the quite iconic Hotel Uzbekistan and some more elegant buildings like the Navoy Theatre, an opera, which was actually built by the same architect who designed Lenin's mausoleum in Moscow. And then you have the metro, which is fantastic. And obviously it's been inspired by the wonderful Moscow metro. And this was started back in 1968 and it's being expanded today. So we usually try and use the metro as well. Then from Tashkent, we jump on a flight and we travel all the way to Nukus. Not because it's the most beautiful place in the world. It isn't. It's a little bit of a backwater. But as Caroline was saying, we go to Nukus for the Savitsky Museum, which is phenomenal. And I have to say, those of you that know Wild Frontiers know that we don't usually get overly excited about one particular museum, but it is a very, very special place. You don't need to be an art lover, but you will find here a collection of some of the Soviet Union's, most treasured avant-garde pieces that, as Caroline said, wouldn't have survived if it wasn't for this guy, Igor Savitsky, who saved them from otherwise destruction. So it's a very, very special place. And a lot of people bizarrely put this as an unexpected highlight of their entire trip to Uzbekistan. But going on to more classic sites, the first place that we really visit on the kind of 3 royal cities of this tour is Khiva. Now, Khiva had always been a kind of outpost on the Silk Road, and it always vied with Bukhara for control of this part of the Silk Road. But eventually, Bukhara got the upper hand, and Khiva became subordinate and effectively a vassal state to Bukhara. And then gradually, as the Russians in the 19th century started to encroach on their territory, the people of Khiva got a pretty nasty reputation for raiding the Russian caravans and for taking Russians as slaves. And as Jonny said, it is a phenomenal story, which if you haven't read it, I implore you to read Peter Hopkirk's The Great Game, which tells this story. It is quite phenomenal, but eventually the Russians did gain dominion over Khiva. One of the most memorable parts of Khiva are its city walls. Now, these date mainly from the 18th century. They're 2.5 kilometers long. They encircle the entire city, and they're a great place to wander for photography, for sunset, for looking out over the inner city. And the inner city, the Ichen Kala, is a preserved, very well taken care of place. I think since 1967 it's been preserved. One of the criticisms or one of the comments that people have of Khiva is it feels a little bit like it's a living museum. And to some extent it is. You won't find lots of people living inside the old city. It is very much a kind of preserved city. But if you take that on board, you will find an incredible concentration of some of the finest Islamic architecture everywhere. And this is one of the most iconic sites that you will find in Khiva. It is the Kalta Minor Minaret. And there's an interesting story. This was started in 1852. And the Khan, the guy that commissioned it, wanted it to be 70 meters tall. He thought that if it was that tall, he'd be able to see his rivals over in Bukhara. Probably a little bit optimistic considering the fact that Bukhara is about 400 kilometers away. But anyway, that was his plan. But after just 3 years, he was killed, which is why the minaret was never completed, leaving it at just 26 meters tall. But to some extent, the fact that it was never completed has left it as this very, very iconic, truncated minaret right in the center of Khiva. And you will see absolutely stunning, these green and blue tiles and the geometric patterns, which Uzbekistan architecture is so famous for. There are minarets there which have completed. This dates from 1908. This is 45 meters tall, and it's got some stunning tile work there. Also in Khiva, you'll find the Juma Mosque. Now this dates from the 18th century. You'll find 218 wooden columns designed much more like an Arabian mosque. But actually this is on the site of a much older mosque. And some of these columns date back to the 10th century, and you will find some absolutely wonderful woodwork in and around the mosque area. And even though it is a museum city, as you wander around, getting photographs, finding new corners, you will find life, you will find artists, you will find craftspeople, and it's a really great place to spend a day discovering. But then we head for Bukhara. Now, Bukhara, I think for Jonny especially, and for a lot of people, is probably their favorite of the three royal cities. It is definitely the most atmospheric, and you'll find that it dates back a long, long, long time. It's an oasis that is on an important trading route, and going back 2,500 years, you'll find the Sogdians lived there, as well as there was a big Jewish community that lived there and traded. But Bukhara really gained its prominence under the time of Islam, whereas Jonny said it had 365 mosques in its heyday, and it became a real center for philosophers, for poets, and for scholars. And this is really where its reputation stemmed from, even after the power shifted to Samarkand. And the center of medieval Bukhara is really the center of Bukhara today, and it's the Liabi house. Now, a house is a Persian word for an artificial reservoir, and the Liabi house, which you can see here, was the largest of 200 reservoirs that were scattered throughout the city, all fed by a canal which was built in the 1620s. And people would come here to gossip, to make tea, to wash their clothes. And today it is a center for both locals and for visitors to come and get a meal, and really just to kind of take in the ambience of the whole town. And then you have the Kalan Minaret, which is probably one of the iconic symbols of the city. Amazingly, this minaret dates back to 1127. That's almost 900 years old. And the reason why it's still standing is because of three quite novel techniques. First of all, it has foundations that go 10 meters below the ground, some of it interlaced with reeds to deal with the earthquakes that hit the region. Secondly, the mortar that was used to build the foundations, they let it set for 2 years before they laid a single brick on top of it. And thirdly, as you can see, the minaret itself is tapered, and that gives it added stability. And it's said that when Genghis Khan came through the region, he was so in awe of this that he forbade anyone to destroy it. And that's the reason why this is one of the only monuments that stems from the pre-Genghis era in Bukhara. And it really is quite an amazing sight to see. Other sites that you'll find in Bukhara is the Charminar, and this is a really beautiful kind of an architectural gem, which was built, commissioned by a Turkish merchant who they believe had travelled to neighbouring India, where he'd seen a very similar building by the same name in Hyderabad in India, which some of you may well have seen. And there are other monuments scattered throughout Bukhara. There's the Bolo House Mosque, which was the private mosque of the Emir. So he would come out of the ark in big ceremony, he would cross over and he would pray there. And you'll find wonderful kind of just artwork throughout the whole things. But unlike Khiva, Bukhara is a living city, and you will find people living and working, and it's a great place to go for shopping. And those of you that say, oh, I'm not into shopping, yeah, good luck in Bukhara. You will spend money. They are incredible artists. There are carpets, there's pottery, there's Suzanis, which are very much sought after, kind of nomadic textiles there. And yes, all forms of payment are accepted, and you will definitely enjoy doing some shopping there. It's also a great place to either have a meal with a local family, which we can usually arrange, or to even just go to a restaurant, which is kind of run by family locals. It's a really fun, atmospheric place, and you can spend several days there if you so desire. Then we do something different. Anyone that's traveled a lot knows that however wonderful churches are, however wonderful temples are, however wonderful mosques are, you can have too much of a good thing, and sometimes you just need to give yourself a break. So what we usually try and do is to incorporate into almost all of our Uzbek itineraries is a break going up to the Norata Mountains, which are really between Bukhara and Samarkand, and really provide a very welcome break. And as Caroline was saying, if you go there in spring, it's wonderful, but autumn is also a great time. And really, you can be a kind of as interactive and as active as you want to be. You can go for walks. We can arrange walks from village to village, or just little half-day trips. You can see locals just doing craft work. There's, you know, little rides you can do on donkeys, or just see locals. There's nature, and you can help out with locals. Sometimes you can help people baking bread. You can help them raise silkworms. You can gather walnuts. And I think Natalie was de-shelling almonds. Or you can just sit and relax and just take a breath from the amazing cultural sites that you've seen further down to the south. And the accommodation up here is more basic, it is more simple, but the food is very good, and you get a very, very genuine welcome, and it really fits in nicely as a welcome break in your cultural sightseeing. But we leave the best for last. And for me, my favorite of all the three cities is Samarkand, and partly it's because of this, the Registan. This is one of those photographs that I'd seen as a child growing up, and in the same way that I saw Machu Picchu or I saw the Taj Mahal and I wanted to go there, this was one of those sites that I always wanted to go to, and it didn't disappoint when I got there. The plaza that you can see here, that was the medieval center of Samarkand. It used to be a huge bazaar. And what you can see now, these three madrasa all around, these were actually built over a period of 200 years from about 1420 onwards. And I think one of the things that makes it so special is the fact they're not symmetrical. If you have a look, they don't just mirror each other, but they really work incredibly well in harmony with each other. And it's the type of place that you can come back throughout the day, come back at sunset, come back at night, and you'll get different things from it. It is spectacular. And up close, you'll see some of the tile work, which is on a par with really anything that you may well have seen in Iran, for those of you that have traveled there. But Samarkand isn't just about the Registan. You've got places that I think are equal in worth. You've got the Gur-e-Imam Mausoleum. Now, this is where Tamerlane and some of his sons and some of his grandsons are buried. And it's notable for me for two things. One, this dome that you can see here. This is quite a special dome. It needed very special construction. It's got a hidden dome underneath, because had it been built without that, it just would have collapsed under its own weight. This was a very special technique, which they learned from the Persians in Iran. And when you go inside, this is what awaits you. It really is one of the most spectacular ceilings that I've ever seen. And then you've got the Shai Zinda. This is the avenue of mausoleums. And since the 7th century, when Muhammad's cousin died and was buried here, VIPs from the area have added tombs to this region. So over really 1200 years, you've got such different styles of mausoleum in the area, and it's one of the most richly, densely populated kind of Islamic areas of just art and tiles that you're likely to see, and it's a bit of a pilgrimage for a lot of Muslims. It's outstanding. And then you've got some other bizarre sites. Tamerlane's grandson Ulugh, although he was a ruler, he was also an astronomer, and this was only discovered in 1908, but this is actually part of a big observatory that he built. And like Bukhara, Samarkand is a living city. So you can go around, you'll see markets, you'll see musicians. That's some of the bread that Caroline was talking about, which you'll see here as well. And really, you'll be able to just interact and meet some of the locals. Now, you can actually visit Uzbekistan in the winter. Not many people do it, so you will have more places to yourself. We have to adapt the itinerary a little bit, just because it's a little bit cold to be going up into the mountains, but this gives us a chance to go and see some of the desert fortresses, which you'll find just to the north of Khiva. These date back about 2,000 years, and they were built as a whole line of fortresses to protect the cities from the steppes and the nomads to the north. And with an extra day in Bukhara, we usually do a cookery class. And with an extra day in Samarkand, we have a chance to go and see the Konigil Meros factory, which shows you a little bit of the paper making history that Samarkand has. And paper was very, very important on the Silk Road as well. There used to be 42 factories in Samarkand. Now there's really just this one, but they use mulberry bark as their main kind of produce. They don't use no chemical dyes, and you'll see the old process, and you can still buy some of that wonderful paper. And then on other tours, or some people do as extensions, you can go into the Fergana Valley, which lies to the east of Tashkent. And this is often used as a route through to Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan. And as Caroline was saying, it is the breadbasket of the region, and you can visit Kokand there. And this is the Khan's palace that she was talking about. But I'd say the main reason why people come here is, yes, for the produce, but also for the artwork. And here in Margilan, the place that Caroline was talking about, they have one of the best silk factories where they have using all the old techniques to show you how silk goes from mulberry tree to cocoon. You'll see the cocoons boiled and all the threads separated, and then you'll see it woven. You'll see people being taught, and then you will see the amazing textiles that are created from it. And it really is a special place. And even if you've been to silk factories elsewhere, this is one of the most special. And really throughout the whole Fergana Valley, you'll find other more traditional artworks and also more modern craft in practice. And if you do want to go to completely the other side of the country and see the effect of cotton right over in the west, you can go out to the Aral Sea. It can be visited as a long day trip from Nukus, or if you want, you can actually camp overnight near the shores of the Dead Sea, of the Aral Sea, for that experience. And then right in the south, some of our tours go to a place called Termez. Now, this is one of the oldest towns in the whole region. It sits right on the Afghan border. And here you'll find remnants of a Buddhist monastery, which dates back to the 3rd century, and just get a feel for the variety of the region. And if you want to do bits of that or mix and match, as I said, we do have travel consultants who can tailor make the trip for you. This is Natalie. This is Clem, and if neither Natalie nor Clem are available, then bad luck, you get Daniel, and Daniel can take you through your itinerary and help you put together a nice itinerary. And they can add in extras for you, like tea ceremonies. Bukhara has a big puppet reputation, and you can even do wine tasting in Samarkand. Getting around, as I said, you've got flights, the roads are pretty good, and the rail network is expanding and is getting more and more reliable, and it's almost certain that whatever trip you do to Uzbekistan will include at least one train journey. Accommodation-wise, Tashkent, you're generally looking at good, international, if a little bit bland accommodation, but as you start to get into some of the other places, especially Bukhara and Khiva, you have more interesting options. Some of these are merchants' houses which have been converted, and in the bottom left, this is in Khiva, this is a caravanserai which has been converted into a hotel, and probably the one of the most interesting places to stay is right near the desert fortresses, where you can actually stay in yurts. And just to finish up, as I said, you can visit Uzbekistan as a standalone destination. But if you want to combine it with other countries, it works very, very well. So one of our most popular combinations is Turkmenistan, where you can visit the Silk Road city of Merv, you can visit the wondrous Darvaza crater and the rather bizarre city of Ashgabat. And that we do on a trip called Cities of the Silk Road, which is a 14-day trip. If you want to combine it with Kyrgyzstan, Kyrgyzstan has almost no architectural monuments. What you've got there is some of the most wondrous mountainous scenery in the whole region. And that's a 16-day trip called Mountains and Cities of the Silk Road. For those of you with more time or wanting a more substantial journey, you've got Kyrgyzstan, China, and Tajikistan. And this is actually one of our oldest trips in the region, called the Silk Road Odyssey, which is 4 countries and 23 days. If you want to do all 5 stands, you can do so. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. On our 5 stands of Central Asia trip, 29 days you'll need for that. And if you've been saving up your holiday and you want to do the whole shebang and pretty much do the entire Silk Road, you can do that over 48 days, going from Xi'an to Istanbul along the Great Silk Road adventure. I will hand you back to Jonny.
Mark, thank you very much indeed for cracking on through that. Fascinating stuff. We've got some good questions. I'm just going to quickly do the second poll now. So let's just do that and see where we get to. We're kind of interested in this. Obviously, at Wild Frontiers, it's good to know these things. So it's really a question to everyone here as to when they think they next might travel. As soon as I'm able, autumn, winter 21-22, spring 22, or after spring 22. And I'll just give you a few seconds to fill that in, which will be interesting. Yeah, it's funny watching all these things through. It makes me want to get back to Central Asia. I haven't been for a few years, and it's wonderful. Okay, end poll. Let's have a look. Share results. Quite even. Okay, so 41% wanting to go as soon as I'm able. Yeah, that's like me. 27% probably autumn this year and spring next year. And spring next year, 22%, and after spring, 15%. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you very much. Right, so I'm just going to share my screen again so that we can just crack on. Oh, I think I forgot to mention this last time. I forgot I put in a slide in. So Caroline's too modest to do this, so I thought I'd do it for her. Her book, as I say, has been Book of the Year in so many places, and that is really, really extraordinary. So reportage and recipes through Central Asia from hinterland to heartland. It's available in the States, it's available in the UK. So get online and have a read of that. We have worked quite often with the Aga Khan Foundation, which is a wonderful NGO that is about to launch an incredible exhibition at King's Cross here in London. Oops, sorry, that's just popped up. I don't want that. On the 22nd of April until the 16th of June. And in fact, it looks like it's going to be extended until September, which is wonderful. We helped a photographer, Chris Wilton Steer, to travel the Silk Road, and he went from, well, all the way really, from London to Beijing. And this is a collection of his photographs that's going to be outside at King's Cross, so no problem with kind of social distancing and all that, and you'll be able to actually do the journey that he did photographically. So that's a really fun thing to go and do. So keep an eye out for that. Do take a look at our video website, which is wildfrontiers.tv, where we show lots of the videos that we make, which people often send us notes saying how much they enjoy them. If you were watching Benedict Allen last month, sorry, you'll know that we even sent him to Uzbekistan, and he's got a lovely video collection that you can watch there. That's on the homepage, just wildfrontiers.tv. The next webinar we're going to have is with the fabulous Kate Humble, which is wonderful news. She is going to be with us on the 28th of April, so a little bit more than a month away, at 6 o'clock in the evening as usual, to talk about India. We sent Kate on an offbeat trip in Madhya Pradesh, and we're going to be talking about what's probably my first love, India beyond the Taj Mahal. So do keep that in mind. A link for that will be in the email tomorrow. And if you're feeling a bit depressed about not being able to travel and COVID rates rising in Europe and this sort of thing, and you're stuck in the UK worried that the British government isn't going to allow you to travel, then we have an option for you. So we've put on a new trip in Northumbria, which is running June, July, August and September. So we've got 4 departures there, and another one to the Orkneys and Shetland Isles, which I was lucky enough to do last year, which I absolutely loved. So 2 really nice trips there in case we can't get away this summer. If you'd like to book a Zoom consultation with one of our travel specialists, please do. You can talk about any of our destinations and you'll have some expert advice. And particularly if after tonight we don't get around to asking your question, do get in touch with Natalie or Dan or any of the team here, and they'll be able to help you. The Wild Frontiers Foundation, one of the downsides of doing these talks virtually rather than in an actual place is that we don't get to charge an entrance fee. And the entrance fees always went to the foundation, and that helped us finance a lot of projects that we do around the world. This particular picture is taken at a school that we built in northern Pakistan, where we educate about 80 odd children there. We are involved in women's empowerment projects in India, disaster relief, and a number of different projects around the world. What we ask is that you think about making a small donation tomorrow. We'll send the link in the webinar. It's been amazing. Since I started asking this, we've raised over £2,500, which is huge. I mean, that £2,500 basically pays for this school in northern Pakistan. So the more money we raise, the more we can put towards these causes. And believe me, during COVID, most of these people have been forgotten about. So it's really worthwhile. So that would be great. Thank you. We are still working on a £200 or $250 deposit, which is reduced, and a 10% deposit on tailor-mades. And we still have our COVID promise, which basically means if a trip can't go because of COVID, you will get a refund or a free transfer. And we have maximum group size 12, tour leaders and local guides, interesting and comfortable accommodation and transport, full board on most trips, so all meals are included, COVID, health and safety protocols, and the tailor-made team. We have a full team of specialists who have expert knowledge in their area, and we are ATOL protected. Right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Caroline, if you have still got ability to get your video back on, do so and join us for a Q&A. So the first question I'm going to ask, because I love this, because this is from Michelle. Michelle, you'd be surprised how many times I hear this. Hello, I'm dying to go, but my husband only likes luxury hotels. Well, I can sort of get him into 4-star at best. What is the likelihood of us doing the trip together, or should I book a single trip and leave him behind? The answer, I think I can probably jump in and answer this straight off. Mark, you might have something to say, and indeed, Caroline, you might as well. But my answer would be, yes, you could do it with your husband. There are enough nice hotels these days, atmospheric ones, certainly that Mark was showing there, that would be suitable for your husband. If you wanted to mix Uzbekistan with Kyrgyzstan, then I'd leave him at home because the accommodation in Kyrgyzstan is a little bit more rough and ready. But yeah, would you agree with that, guys?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, if you stick to the main cities, you can have some very, very nice accommodation these days.
Great. Caroline, one definitely for you. Elizabeth asks, is Uzbekistan safe for solo female travelers?
I always hesitate to say this because obviously everyone's experience is different. I have been to Uzbekistan solo several times. I've never come into any problems. My only advice would be the same for men, really. A little bit of Russian goes a long way. Being able to at least read the Cyrillic alphabet is really useful. But generally, I think Uzbekistan is a police state. I mean, the crime levels are very low. People are very graceful, very helpful generally. As with any big cities at night, don't wander around in the dark, or at least be aware of where your hotel is, how to get back. But I would say I wouldn't hesitate. The first trip I ever did was by myself to Tajikistan, up to the Pamirs, and then overland to Samarkand. And I was completely fine. I was slightly out of my depth, but I was completely fine. Yeah, I'd say go for it.
Good. Yeah, I think that's right. Be sensible and like you would anywhere, really. Quick question from, well, you mentioned Russian there, Caroline, and I have to say, I remember that the day I cracked the Cyrillic code, and I thought, whoa, I can read this now. And then, of course, I realized I couldn't understand what I was reading. But it's a major thing, being able to speak a bit of Russian, which I kind of picked up on my 5-month journey. Sue is asking, how far can you get with modern Turkish in Uzbekistan? Which is a good question. I don't know the answer.
It is a good question. That it's a Turkic language, Uzbek, so you're going to find similarities like with kara, black, ak, white, su, water. Really, one of my best friends lives in Istanbul. She's Japanese and she married a Turk, and I'm desperate to travel with her to Uzbekistan so I can test this properly. I've never traveled in Uzbekistan with a Turkish person. I think you would understand some. I think it's certainly useful. I think that's all I can say on the subject, really.
Yeah, I would have thought the same. Mark, we've got a lot of questions about traveling to Uzbekistan in winter, and particularly around hotels having heating and that sort of thing. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something which is generally done. It's something, if I'm honest, it's a new thing for us to actually do group tours, but we've had tailor-made people go there over winter. It is cold, but generally you're looking at single digits, and the hotels themselves are absolutely fine and warm. And it's the advantage of it is, as I said, you should get some wonderful crisp days. And it is also that the busier times, I mean, obviously COVID has changed everything, but it is true that May and September, which are great times to go, we're getting in certain places, certain pinch points, quite busy. As with everywhere, you can always do things in a different way. You know, don't go to certain places at exactly the same time that everyone else is going. But if you prefer to travel off season, it's definitely doable.
I think one of the things that is worth mentioning, because again, people have asked this, is it depends really on if you want to do, generally speaking, what is the best time to visit Uzbekistan? It generally depends on what you want to do. If you're doing combined trips, then Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, for example, absolutely, May, September, wonderful. If you're combining it with Kyrgyzstan, you're slightly more limited because the mountains of Kyrgyzstan, you've really got to be in there mid-June to mid-September, which means if you're coming into Samarkand, then it's going to be hot. I personally love the heat, so it doesn't bother me, but it can be up to 40 degrees in August, obviously. So you have to kind of balance up which trip you want to do, and kind of take it from there. A question that I'm going to answer is from James. James read William Dalrymple's article, which we helped Willie put together. We did the trip with him a couple of years ago to Uzbekistan. And William mentioned in the article that some of the sites are overly renovated. And that's worrying James about going there. James, don't be worried. I would say there are 1 or 2 sites. I mean, I've been going to Uzbekistan since the late 90s, and some of the sites have been renovated more than they were. I'm thinking particularly the Shahrizindar in Samarkand, which was a crumbling place with grass growing out of the roofs and all sorts. And it has been renovated to within an inch of its life. But I kind of sympathize with the Uzbeks on this because I'm not sure how else they could have done it, really. And that is the only place out of Bukhara, Khiva and Samarkand that I would say has slightly lost a little bit of its old charm. But certainly the Registan, the Gul Amir Mausoleum, the Bibi Qayyum Mosque in Samarkand, all these places are fabulous. And really, no, don't be put off by that. It's a great place to go and see. Caroline or Mark, really, advice on Uzbek currency. Can I quickly just say before you answer this, I remember years ago being there and the biggest note was a 200 som note, and that was worth about 5 cents or something. And when I went to the bazaar, the money changers, I came back. I mean, it was like kind of Germany in the 30s, wheelbarrow full of cash. I didn't even count it. I had to just get lumps of it and give it to each of the clients on the trip, roughly speaking. It was crazy. So it's a good question. I suspect things have changed since then.
Caroline?
Well, the money changes have all gone now. I can remember always having to change money. I'd get a shopkeeper to run out and change my dollars to get a better rate. ATMs can be a little bit problematic sometimes, but the hotels, the big hotels in Tashkent have like the Hyatt I used to go to and get money out of the ATM machines there. It's not really a problem like it used to be.
Okay. Credit cards?
Cash.
Cash.
Still,
okay.
I think. I mean, the last time I was in Uzbekistan was 2019,
Yeah.
and I was taking cash out from ATMs and making sure I had enough for the next few days.
Great.
Yeah.
One for you, Caroline. Anna asks, can you recommend where we can buy some of these lovely paintings that you were showing in your book, I guess, or?
Right, at the Savitsky.
I'm not sure whether she means the Savitsky or the ones you were showing from your book, but.
Well, I was showing Prince of the Savitsky. I did grab this book off my shelf called Homage to Savitsky.
Oh, yeah.
They don't really have they have a gift shop, I seem to recall, but it's sort of, I think you can get a few postcards, but you can't really buy prints.
No.
This book is excellent.
Okay.
That's the first thing.
Cool. Another one, which I think I'm going to answer because I'm probably best to answer it, is Colin is asking about horses of the Silk Road and the Fergana Valley, which of course the famous horses, the heavenly horses were from. From my experience, the photograph that you saw me holding the two horses was actually just south of the Bukhara border in Turkmenistan, and that was with the Akhilteks. And the Akhilteks are the famous horses that one of which Lord Willoughby brought over in the 18th century and bred with two other horses to form the English thoroughbred. And they're renowned for their endurance, their speed, their stamina. I did find some nice horses in Fergana, but not the Akhilteks. The Akhilteks I found were in Turkmenistan. Caroline, I don't know whether you've had much interaction with the horses of that area.
I have had no, other than watching a Buzkashi match.
Right.
You know, the polo game with the dead goat.
Yeah.
I haven't had any interaction with horses, I'm afraid.
Okay, because I mean, that was one of the main reasons, of course, as Colin points out, why the Silk Road started was the desire for decent horses by the Chinese. Okay, so one last question, which again is probably for you, Mark, and I'm not even sure there's an answer as yet, which I think is going to be the case with a lot of places. Sally asks, what proof of vaccine do you need? And Phil asks, can you get a PCR test in Tashkent or Samarkand before flying home? Because both Americans need it and Brits need it, of course.
The answer to the second one is easy. Yes, you can. In Tashkent, you can get a PCR test. So once we can get people there, it's no problem getting the test to come back. With regards to what proof, this is a question which no one has been able to answer. We've had governments come out and go, yay, come and visit us, just show proof of having had a vaccine. And I know my dad had a vaccine recently, and he got given a card which literally looks like a video membership card. And I sent a scan of that and I said, will that be accepted? And the response come back was, probably. We're waiting for official authorization. To be honest, the problem that we have at the moment is a very disjoined system. We don't have an international standard. I know that there are apps under development, and I really hope that in the next few weeks, we will see some movement of that, which will be accepted both by airlines and internationally, where people will be able to prove that they've had vaccines, which vaccine they've had, whether they've had one, whether they've had two. I think there are also some which are trying to show whether or not you've got the antibodies, whether you've had COVID. So there is room, things will develop, but it's just not ready yet. At the moment, we're told probably be okay with your little card, but I can't guarantee that yet.
Caroline, quick one for you. Uzbekistan for vegetarians from Emma.
Doable. Even though I have recipes in my book for meat, because Central Asia is a very meat-centric place, I don't eat very much meat at all. I'm still here. I mean, great fruit, great bread, good dairy, great salads. Yeah, you can do it.
Yeah, good. I'm just going to quickly answer some of these questions because I can very briefly before we wrap up. Nancy asks, do you have many solo 60-something women travelers on trips with Uzbek? The answer to that is yes, lots. Jessica asks, can you get alcohol? Yes, you certainly can. They have great beer and various other things. But yes, I mean, you know, vodka, all sorts. So yes, everything you want is there. Lovely wine. The wine of Uzbekistan was quite famous. It was quite sweet, wasn't it? It was, I mean, obviously in the Fergana Valley, they have a lot of great production, and it produced wine for the Soviet Union, but of a sweeter variety. So I remember buying a bottle of Uzbek champagne, which wasn't the best champagne I've ever drunk. You're better off sticking to beer and vodka, I think. Can you show the details of the Aga Khan exhibition? That will be in the email tomorrow. We'll send a link to that. That's Mary asking that. Caroline, one for you. Is Margilan the best place to buy ECATs?
Basically, yes.
Yes, good. Okay, guys, there we are. I'm really sorry if we haven't got around to answering your questions, but we will go through all of these again and answer what we haven't answered in the email tomorrow or later on in the week. So look, that just leaves me to say thank you, Caroline, so much. Been absolutely fascinating. So lovely to have you on the webinar tonight, and for giving up your time and for sharing all your stories. Good luck with the book, and I'm sure, you know, you're kind of, well, like all of our careers are kind of rather on hold at the moment, aren't they? But you were saying the other day that you're desperate to get out to Armenia. That's next on the list, is it?
Yeah, I'm keen to get back to the Caucasus. I haven't been for a while, the South Caucasus. So yeah, and thank you, Jonny, Mark, and Mike for having me this evening. It's been really fun.
No problem. It's been great. And thank you, everyone, for sticking around. You know, we got to 680, I wrote it down, hang on a minute, 683 people, where Benedict got 677. So Caroline, position.
Sorry, Benedict, I'm a fan. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, very much. And it's been a great evening. And we'll be back on the 28th of April with Kate Humble talking about India. See you then.